like she just kind of call my mom. And
I've gathered some truly dark stories for tonight. They're full of stuff that should not exist, and you'll definitely want to check the logs.
this girl's family believed that they were dealing with a jinn throughout generations of their family, and this story is terrifying. So Eleanor's maternal grandfather lived in this remote part of the city with like huge open fields and pastures. And when he was 7 years old, his father told him to go grab this chair that was sitting beside a tree in the open field. It was this dried lone tree, and he did not want to go because the sun was setting and he was getting scared. It was going to be dark outside. He didn't want to go out there by himself. Well, he relents and he decides that he's going to go get the chair. He said that the moment that he touched the chair, he looked in front of him and he saw two long black legs. He then slowly looks up and makes eye contact with something with shiny red eyes. Its hands are just dangling from the branch. He said that its legs were like 5 feet long. He said that as soon as he made eye contact with this thing, it just smiled. He said the entire thing was black except for his smile was bright white. He then falls to his knees, starts crawling away while still looking at it, and then turns around and sprints back to his father. He said that the minute he told his father started getting everybody up and like keeping them far away from the tree, and then his father went toward the tree. Now the entire family is watching his father as he's doing this. And they said that as soon as he got about 12 feet from the tree, he started to backtrack, like while still looking at the tree, just walking backwards. He then gets back to the house, he pushes his son into a different room, and he calls a priest. They spend days exercising this thing and then burning broth in the fields. I'm not really sure what that means. After days of this, they finally seal this thing in a jar and they go burn it at a temple. She said that unfortunately after this, her grandfather would go on to live his life as a very paranoid man, and the way that he would leave this place was just not right. I don't mean to be insensitive by doing that. It's the only way I can explain it to you guys without getting in trouble. I also said that his father was affected by this thing as well and would often pray for the entire village that this thing would not affect anybody else. Now, Eleanor said that she had heard this story several different times from her family members and that she had her doubts, but she kind of put it in the back of her mind. Years go by and her and her cousin visit their grand aunt, his sister. While they're there, they go to these tube wells to take a bath because it was summertime, and they start walking along the fields and they find a temple. Now, she said that the temple was sealed with iron fences. Now, she looks at her cousin and she's like, I am not going anywhere near that temple. And her cousin seemingly agrees. Well, they go back to her grand aunt's house and she finds out that her cousin actually went back to that temple without telling her. And she wouldn't tell her what happened there, but she came back with a piece of paper that had these weird words on it. It also had weird symbols and it was in a language that she didn't understand. It was written in Arabic scripture. Well, her cousin tries to read it out loud, fails, and then puts it in her pocket. Now, she said that her cousin was always the type of person to try to prove that ghosts and spirits don't exist, so she was a skeptic. They eventually go on to go to college. Now, they're the same age, same year, and they go to the same college. Now, the college is very well known in their city, and it's the second largest in the nation. It's about the size of a baseball field. Now, there was a building in her campus that was made for storage and club rooms, and her and her cousin were in the same club, the tennis club. Now, after summer break, her cousin, and her cousin's best friend are walking through one of the storage rooms to get to one of the club rooms. She said that there was a hallway splitting into a corridor and then a dead end with a room. The room had a bunch of metal construction bars that looked like this. These bars are standing up very straight and they're very rusted and they're walking right towards the corridor. She said that as they were entering the hallway that all of a sudden it felt very heavy and she got this chill, and the sound of like the talking students that were in the club room that they could hear very clearly started to dissipate. She said that her feet started to feel heavy and that her anxiety grew in a way that she has never felt before or after this. The moment that they're about to turn right before the corridor, they see something sitting on the bars. It was cross-legged, smiling, and its legs had to be at least 6 feet long. She doesn't make eye contact with him, but she saw him. Now, her cousin, on the other hand, makes straight eye contact with this thing and just starts shaking. And when I say shaking, like I'm talking like shaking badly. They're just standing there for like 5 seconds in shock until she just grabs her cousin's arm and forcibly moves her towards the corridor. She said that what was weird is that she basically had to drag her cousin away from this thing and that her cousin was sobbing. As soon as they reach the metal doors to get them out of there, she just starts sobbing hysterically. All of them are crying. She starts sprinting away from this thing and away from her friends. She said that she ran for as long as she could until something grabbed her and just by her hair. She just stood there for a hot minute, just did not know what to do. And she said she just held her breath. That's how scared she was. Her cousin had somehow ran to the office of the dean and called their mother. And her mother and her aunt came and picked both of them up. When their mom comes to get them and her aunt comes to get them, they are hysterically crying about this thing and telling them what they saw. They actually didn't go to college for a week after that, and she ended up quitting the tennis club. She says that she doesn't really remember the following days after that because she was pretty shaken up about this. She probably blocked it out. But that 3 years later, the same thing that happened to her grandfather happened to her cousin. Like, she just kind of... Yeah, her cousin saw this thing everywhere, her yard, her garden, inside of her dreams, inside of her house. Now, she said that her cousin actually had to go to a facility because she couldn't live a normal life. Now, Eleanor ended up moving to a different country, but she said that this will be eating at her entire life, that it absolutely terrifies her, and that she's afraid that it will get bored with her cousin and then choose her. So what do you guys think about this story?
Those 6-foot-long legs hanging from the tree branches make my chest feel tight. The way he glanced up and suddenly saw those red eyes peering back at him is heavy. Then the cousin actually went into that temple and came out with that Arabic paper. I'd be done right then and there. It's so wild that it followed her back home, and now she sees it even in her dreams. It's hard to imagine her getting through the day. The thought of it sitting there on those metal bars, smiling at me with those bright white teeth is definitely something else, and it hasn't left her alone for years.
This story was sent into my email. I don't know how to explain what happened in that housing unit. Even now, years later, I still don't know if what we saw was real, or if that place just made us believe it was. It happened in Fall River, Massachusetts, a place locals used to call the City of Ghosts. Right at the edge of it sat the infamous Lizzie Borden house, like a reminder that the whole town had always carried something off. But this story didn't happen there. It happened in a housing complex called Watupa Heights, a place that doesn't even exist anymore. The last time I went back, it was just an empty field. Nothing left. But I remember exactly what used to stand there, because when I was 8, that place was my entire world. My cousin Serena lived there, and she was my best friend. We were inseparable. Every summer, we'd spend almost every waking hour outside with the neighborhood kids. Games like Manhunt, Cops and Robbers, Kick the Can. It was a different time. Doors stayed unlocked. Parents didn't worry the way they would now. But even back then, there was always something about that place. Serena used to tell me things. Things that had happened in her apartment. A bulky man that terrorized her sister. A child that supposedly appeared in closets, watching over her like a protector. And a woman in white. Always a woman in white. Every room in that building had its own story, its own thing that lived there. I never really knew what to believe, until one night, when I started to experience it myself. It was a normal game of cops and robbers. I was a robber. Kids counted down, and we scattered in every direction, laughing, running, hiding in the dark corners of the complex. I remember running down a small hill behind Serena's building, trying to find somewhere to hide. I stayed close to her place on purpose, because even though I acted like I wasn't scared, I was. And I always felt safer near her apartment. Or, at least, I told myself I did. That was when I ran into Vanna. She was one of the other kids, also on my team. At least I thought she was. She wasn't hiding. She was just standing there in the open field. Completely still. Back straight. Head tilted slightly to the side. Like she was listening to something no one else could hear. I remember walking up to her slowly. "You need to hide. They're going to find you." I grabbed her arm gently to move her, but she didn't react. Not even a flinch. I noticed that her face looked blank. Distant, like she wasn't fully there. And then suddenly, she snapped out of it. Like something inside her had reset. She looked at me and said something that didn't match the moment at all. She asked me to talk to Serena. Said something was wrong. That Serena had been acting strange with everyone. I remember feeling confused, but I agreed. And then I felt it. The air changed. Cold and sudden, heavy. My eyes drifted upward without me meaning to the second floor of Serena's building. My stomach dropped. Because, I don't know why, but I felt like something was there. Something watching. When I turned back to Vanna to answer her, she was gone. Just Completely gone. No footsteps, no rustling grass, no sound at all. The field was empty. And for a moment, I wasn't sure if she had ever even been there with me. That's when I heard shouting in the distance. "We found one." I turned and ran, panic hitting me instantly. I cut around the building toward Serena's side, and suddenly hands grabbed my sweater and pulled me hard behind the structure. I almost screamed, but then I saw her, Serena. She was laughing at first. "Got you," she said. But I was shaking and out of breath, and something didn't feel right anymore. I looked at her and immediately asked about Vanna. "She told me to talk to you," I said. "She was acting weird in the field." Serena stopped smiling, and her expression changed instantly. "When did you see her?" she asked. "Just now," I said. "She was right there." That's when everything went quiet. Not the environment, not the kids outside, something deeper than that. Serena looked at me like I had said something wrong without knowing it, and then she said something I'll never forget. She left at the beginning of the game. Her mom called her inside. She walked into her apartment. She never came back out. I felt like I couldn't breathe because I knew what I had just seen. And Serena wasn't confused. She was scared. And then she told me something else. Something that she hadn't told anyone before. She said things had been getting worse. That just that morning, she had been in the bathroom when a woman outside the door whispered her name and told her to come out, but her mother wasn't home. She was at the store, so whoever was calling her couldn't have been real. And yet she heard it, clear as day. And then, right after, she heard the front door open, her mother calling her from the kitchen. Like nothing had happened, like reality itself had shifted. And I didn't know what to say. So I just hugged her, because it was the only thing that felt real anymore. That night we stayed inside. We tried to forget about it. We ate dinner quickly and tried to act normal, but nothing about the house felt normal anymore. The stairs were directly in front of the living room, and from where we sat, we could see them perfectly, leading up to the second floor. It was almost 1 a.m. when everything got quiet. Serena was next to me on the couch, and just before I drifted off, she grabbed my knee hard and whispered, "Don't turn your head. Just look." My heart stopped. My eyes shifted slowly into my peripheral vision, toward the stairs, and that's when I saw her. A woman, crouched at the top of the staircase, long black hair hanging over her face, but one eye, just one, staring directly at us, unblinking. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. Then she slammed her hand on the railing. A loud crack echoed through the room. Serena squeezed my leg so hard it hurt, and the woman started to rise. Slowly, step by step, the stairs creaked under her weight, and it felt like the pressure in the house was pressing in on itself. I remember thinking, she's coming down. And then everything snapped. Serena stood up suddenly and told me not to look. She ran to the front door and flipped the light switch on. Instantly, silence. And the stairs were empty. No woman, no movement, nothing. Like she had never been there at all. Serena grabbed my hand and pulled me into the bedroom, slamming the door behind us. We didn't sleep that night. We waited until morning. And when her parents came home, we told them everything. Later, a monk was brought in to bless the home. And for a while, things calmed down, but they never fully stopped.
Yo, I'm actually staring at my own steps right now. I don't think I'll be getting any rest after this. That girl Vanna standing on the field, hearing nothing is bad enough. She was listening to something that wasn't even there. I mean, that's so messed up. But then that woman at the top of the stairs, with only one eye trained on them, I'd lose my mind. The sound of the woods cracking when she started coming down is way too much for me. I would move out of that place and never look back again. It is quite a nightmare for everyone involved now.
An email from this girl who said that her and her friends went to the Appalachian Mountains, and one of her friends was literally knocked unconscious by some creature. So we're going to call this girl Kelsey for the story. So when Kelsey was around 15, 16 years old, her and her two friends, we're going to call them Chloe and Lacey, decided that they wanted to go to Kelsey's late grandparents' cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. None of them had driver's license at this time, and so her mom, Kelsey's mom, had to drop them off. And the only thing that Kelsey's mom said when she dropped them off is, "Don't go into the forest that night." She did not tell them about the rules at all. They did not not know about the rules at all whatsoever. That's important to know. Now, she said that when they got into the cabin, they set their stuff down, and the only thing that they did do right is they locked the door. They left the windows unlocked, and they didn't close the curtains. It starts to get dark outside after they've put all their stuff away, so they decide that they're going to go into the living room and they're going to watch a couple of movies. They're sitting there enjoying the movie when suddenly they hear tap, tap, tap on the window. They all kind of look at each other like, why? What is that? So Chloe decides that she's going to get up and she's going to go over and open the curtain and see what's outside tapping on the window. So she does that, but she doesn't see anything. As she's walking back, though, she did say that she had kind of a weird feeling in her stomach. After she sits back down, they resume the movie and they're just chilling when tap, tap, tap. Again, someone is knocking on the window. So Chloe gets up again. She checks the window again. Still nothing. She walks over. She sits back down. They resume the movie again. And then tap, tap, tap. Really loud on the window this time. This time, Lacey stands up. And Lacey is super annoyed at this point. So she goes over. She thinks that someone is messing with them. She opens the curtains. And as soon as she opens those curtains, she falls to the ground and starts screaming. Kelsey said that to this day, Lacey still will not talk about what she saw at that window. And the crazy thing was that they stayed there for a week, and this was only the first day. Well, the next day, Lacey is just traumatized at this point. And so she is like, I'm not leaving this house. I don't want to go anywhere. She won't talk about what she saw, nothing. And so Chloe and Kelsey decide that they're going to go on a hike in the mountains. So they go on a hike for a little bit. They're out there for about an hour when suddenly Chloe starts to feel sick, like very sick, and she has to sit down. As Chloe is sitting down, just kind of trying to make herself feel better, Kelsey said that she had this innate feeling that something was watching them. So Kelsey tells Chloe, like, I think we need to go. I feel like someone is watching us. And so they get up and they go back home. The only thing is when they walk through the door, Lacey is not home. She is not there. They check all the rooms. She's not there. They call her 7 times. They called her and she is not answering her phone. They don't really know what to do at this point. They're getting a little worried when Lacey suddenly walks through the door. And Kelsey said that when Lacey walked through the door after that, like that entire night, she was acting really odd. Like she wasn't acting like herself. So they all decide that they are going to go to bed, but not before locking all the windows, closing the curtains, and locking the door. Well, Kelsey goes into her room, she gets ready for bed, and she falls asleep. She wakes up at 5 a.m. because she hears tiles creaking, like someone is walking on the tiles outside of her door. She just kind of calls out, "Girls," silence. Nothing. So she gets up and she walks into their rooms. She walks into Lacey's room. Lacey's not in her room. She walks into Chloe's room. Chloe's not in her room. Suddenly, tap, 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 coming from the bathroom window, which is the only one without curtains. So bravely, Kelsey decides that she's going to walk over and check that window. And she goes over and checks and nothing is there. She thinks that maybe she was just hearing something. And so she decides to brush this off and go to bed. So she goes to bed and she wakes up the next morning and she walks outside of the room and she asks Chloe and Lacey, like, "Did you guys get up last night?" And Lacey's like, "Nope." And Chloe's like, "No, I thought that was you guys." Kelsey was a little confused about why she didn't see them in their beds, but I guess she kind of kept this to herself. She didn't really say anything about that. So that day was pretty uneventful. But later on that night, Chloe suggests that they go outside when it gets dark to watch the stars. This was the worst idea ever. She says that as they were watching the stars, they're laying on the grass and they're just looking up at the sky and they're admiring how beautiful the stars are in the mountains because they live in the city and they are not the same in the city. And I can attest to that. So they're just chatting, looking at the stars when suddenly they hear this crack, this like creaking noise. It sounds like someone is stepping on a stick. Now, they look behind them and they don't see anything. So they kind of just brush this off. They lay back down again. They're looking up at the stars and now they're like counting the stars. And as soon as they're counting the stars, all of a sudden Lacey jumps up and she starts screaming. And she's like, "Something just grabbed my hair. Something just grabbed my hair." Now, Chloe and Casey are like, "What do you mean something grabbed your hair? Like, are you okay?" They're trying to comfort her at this point. And right as they're trying to comfort her, something grabs Lacey's hair and pulls her down so hard that she gets knocked out. Kelsey said that as soon as this happened, she saw exactly what did this. And still to this day, over 5 years later, it still haunts her. She said she saw this pale, white-faced creature with Lacey's hair in its teeth as it was smiling, and there was all over its teeth. She's looking at this thing, and this thing is just looking back at her with Lacey's hair in its teeth, smiling at her and coming out of its mouth. As Kelsey is looking at this thing, absolutely horrified, she feels this big shove, and she gets shoved to the ground so hard that she hits her face on the ground, and now her mouth is She said Chloe was just standing there screaming as Kelsey is on the ground. Lacey's still knocked out. At this point, Kelsey looks at Chloe and is just like, call my mom and tell her to come get us. Chloe runs inside of the house as Lacey is still knocked out, and Kelsey is just sitting there tasting her own in her mouth, and this thing is still behind her and she can hear it, but she's not looking at it because she's terrified to look at this thing and she doesn't know what else to do, but her face hurts, so she doesn't want to get up. Kelsey said that she laid there for what felt like forever until her mom came and picked them up, and her mom gets out of the car, helps. At this point, I think Lacey is awake at this point. She helps Lacey get into the back seat. She helps Kelsey get into the back seat, and Chloe gets in the front seat, and she said that Chloe was just crying the entire way home. Kelsey said that to this day, she still sometimes will see that white face, especially when she's going through something hard, which I think is absolutely terrifying. And she also said that it just haunts her in her nightmares. She can't get it out of her head. So what did you guys think about this story? What do you think this was? Has anyone ever heard of anything like this in the Appalachian Mountains? That might be the first story that I've heard where someone actually got like hurt, like by something that was haunting them. Not that it was haunting them. Whatever this thing was, we don't know what it was. Or maybe someone in the comments can say what they think it was, because I would love to know if you know, and I'm sure she would too.
The idea of that creature with hair cut in its teeth is awful. It's the grin that I hate the most. That image of blood on its face while it just looks back at her is something I'll never forget. Why did they even stay there for a whole week after that night? If I heard tapping on my window like that, I'd be gone in 5 minutes. No way I'm hanging around to see what's making that sound. Poor Lacey, I can't believe she's still coping with that. It's so creepy. And that thing was still staying right back behind them.
What would happen if you followed a mimic? Now, I've always wondered this, because you hear these stories of someone hearing like their mother knocking at the door or telling them to come in the kitchen. But what would happen if you actually listened to the mimic? Here's a story that might tell you why you should not follow a mimic. There was this young man named Aiden. Now, Aiden lived with his grandfather and his two parents. Now, one day, Aiden was hanging out in his bedroom and he's playing a game. Well, he hears his parents like pull in, and he looks out the window and sees them getting out of the car, unloading some groceries into the house. So he's like, awesome, man, we're going to have something to eat. So he goes back to his game, and then he hears his mother say, Aiden, come in the kitchen. I got some food. And he, at this time was like in the middle of a battle. So he's like, hold on, Mom, I'll be there shortly. I'm in the middle of a battle. And she goes, come on, Aiden, hurry up. Come in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, he said he got a phone call, and it was from his mom. And he's like, why is she calling me when she's in the kitchen? So he picks it up, and his mom's like, hey, honey, we're at the grocery store. Do you want us to get you anything? And he goes, what do you mean you're at the grocery store? You already got groceries. You're in the kitchen. She goes, what are you talking about? We just got to the grocery store. And he looks out the window and sees that their car is not there. And then right at this moment, he hears his mom saying, you better get in the kitchen right now or you're going to be in trouble. You better come eat. And he's like, I got to call you back, Mom. He hangs up. So he goes and he locks his door, and then he calls his mom right back and is like, look, when you get home, call me. I'll help you bring in the groceries. So about 25, 30 minutes later, his mom calls him, and she's like, honey, we're home. Come outside. And he said he was getting ready to go out of his room, but he looked out his window first and their car wasn't there. So he's like, you know what? I don't know what to do, because I don't know who really is my mom right now. So as he's sitting in his bedroom, right, he hears his parents come home and come into the house. And all of a sudden his mom comes up to his door and starts knocking. And she goes, Aiden, let me in. And he's like, not right now, Mom. And she goes, what are you talking about? Let me in. Unlock this door. Why do you have the door locked? And he's like, no, I'm not opening the door. And his mom goes, all right, I'll just get the key and unlock it. So he grabs this baseball bat that's chilling in his room, and he's prepared for this thing to come in. And at the time, he still thinks whatever, was calling his name in the kitchen, this is them. So he sees the handle jiggle and the door open, and it's really his mom. And he can tell that it is actually his real mom. And she goes, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, nothing. And he sets it back down. And she's like, you're acting weird and stuff. And there's food in the fridge if you're hungry. So he didn't know what to make of that. Like, what did he just experience? And he didn't feel like he could tell his parents about it. So he decided to talk to his grandpa, who was kind of like his best friend at the time. So he goes to his grandpa's room and he's like, Grandpa, he's like, have you ever seen something like you can't explain? And he goes, what do you mean? And he tells the story about like how he thought his mom and dad had came home, he seen their car and everything, but it wasn't actually them. And the grandpa goes, oh no. And he goes, what's wrong, Grandpa? And he says, well, when I was a young boy, I grew up in a small Polish village near Warsaw. And he said, we had this term that was this long Polish word, but it roughly translated into evil twin. And he said they believed there were these evil spirits that could take the form of anyone and would try and trick you and lure you, out into the woods. So his grandpa said, when I was a young boy, my father had me chopping wood outside. And I hear my grandma's voice coming from the forest. And she's saying, come in the woods. I baked you a pie. Like, come out here. It's nice and warm. Like, you'll like this pie. And he said, he was so hungry, like he almost started to go out into the woods until his father ran and grabbed him and said, get back in the house. And his father locked the door and said, if you hear someone calling you from the woods, don't ever go. Don't respond. So he said, when you encounter an evil twin, as they called it, they will follow you for the rest of your life. And he feared that maybe this thing had followed him here to America. And this is what Aiden had seen. A couple weeks later, his parents are gone and it's just him and his grandpa. And they're watching this World War II documentary in the living room. Well, all of a sudden, the wind picked up and a strong breeze pushes the back kitchen door open and they hear it, open up. So his grandpa's like, I'll go and close the door real quick and I better lock it so it doesn't blow open again. So his grandpa goes into the kitchen, but after about 10, 15 minutes, he doesn't come back. So Aiden's like, Grandpa, are you all right? He goes into the kitchen, the back door's still open, and he doesn't see his grandpa. He goes throughout the house, he's yelling his name, he doesn't see him anywhere. So he goes out, to the back door and he's yelling his grandpa's name, he doesn't hear it. So he calls up his parents and his parents come home immediately and they call the police and they do this big search throughout the neighborhood and into the woods. And they end up finding his grandfather in the middle of the woods. He is confused and doesn't know who he is, doesn't know anything, doesn't remember anything. So they bring him back home and everything. Well, Aiden said that, they chalked this up to dementia and said he was diagnosed with a severe case of dementia. But Aiden, in his mind, suspected because of the series of events that happened before this and his grandfather going out to the kitchen when the door opened, that this was the evil twin thing that his grandfather had talked about. And he said, although his grandfather had completely lost his memory, from time to time, he would say to Aiden, is my brother outside? Is my brother out there?
Aiden's mom phoning him while her voice is also calling from the kitchen is like a total head trip. I'd be totally stuck in that bedroom. Then his grandfather gets lured out and found in the woods later on with no memory. That poor guy gazing out of the window and asking for his brother is the worst part. It seems as if some part of him stayed out there with whatever tricked him. I'm not sure how anyone could feel safe in that house again. The image of that thing still lurking around, just waiting for a chance to copy someone else, is going to keep me up.
Let me give you guys a story time of when my friend and I went to a party, a chillers, and one of them came back insane. So for story's sake, I'm going to call this girl Bloom, okay? So to give you guys context now, Bloom was dating this guy who was not from South Africa and he was not from Nigeria either, guys. And one day this guy invited her to a thing that he was having with his friends, and she invited me and the other girl, and it was the three of us, alright? Cool. Now my thing is, when we got to this particular house, when we're getting off the Uber, I felt like something is off, but then I was like, maybe I'm just nervous. Now we enter through the gate, whatever. When we get to the door, there is a security guard at the door, okay. So Bloom is like, no guys, put your things in the box, like they're safe, nobody's gonna steal your phone, whatever. We put our bags inside the box, our bags which had our IDs and wallets. Okay, we walk through the passage. When we get there, guys, these people, number one, were doing hard substances. You know what I mean, the DRU, yeah. They were doing hard substances. Some of these substances I have never in my life seen them before or heard of them. The only one that I know was the one which the people in the movies do like this with the card. Yeah, that one. And so we get there, we sit down. And also, guys, another thing, before we got here, Bloom was like, you guys are not to take anything. Don't smoke the habli that these people are smoking. Don't drink anything that anybody offers you, even if it's in the closed bottle. Now you know Bloom knew, guys. We get there, me and my friend are sitting together, and obviously Bloom is there cuddled up with her boyfriend. Bloom brings us a bottle and we're drinking. You know, it's not even vibes for me, but anyways, as time goes on, more and more people start showing up. It's girls, it's guys. At some point, my dear, they switch off the lights. And then like a disco comes on, you know, it's going like this. But you know, in the midst of this entire setup, you can see the things that are happening. These people are doing things naked. I'm not gonna say what they were doing. Put 1 + 1 together. Some of them are taking all these substances, putting them on their body. Like, people are naked. It was like a diddy party, guys. And me and my friend were so scared. Like, we're also like holding on to each other because like we're like, what is going on? So like, and another thing is like, these men are trying to pull my friend, they are trying to pull me, and I'm just like, no, like I don't want to get pulled by these guys. Eventually we tell my friend like, nah, like we've had enough now, we want to leave, you know. She's like, no, her boyfriend, guys, number one, was like, did they do anything? And I didn't know what he meant by that. So we're like, no, we didn't do anything, we just want to leave. And my friend is like, no man, let me just go talk to him. And I'm thinking, what do you mean, did we do anything? Now I know when he said did they do anything, he meant did we dala with any of the guys there. Hi, my friend comes back after like a couple of minutes or whatever. She comes back to us. And then she's like, yeah guys, we can leave, like we're all leaving. Okay, we get to the door, we take our phones, we take our bags, and then we leave. In the car, guys, in the Uber, we were not saying anything to each other because I felt like my friend sold us out. Shame, I felt like she sold us and she did not say anything to us. Okay, cool. We get home, I get home, my friend gets home, my Bloom also gets home, whatever. It's chill vibes. Okay, the following day, like I feel like I felt the need to confront her about what had happened. But we get there with my other friend or whatever, and we're talking to Bloom. Before we even get to that, Bloom is like, listen, my boyfriend called. She called him by name. She's like, my boyfriend called. She tells me that one of you guys stole something from him. And because it wasn't me, guys, I was like, hey, I don't know what I don't know what you're talking about because I didn't take anything from that house. My other friend is also like, you know, oh, it's not me. And I'm like, what was it? What was taken? He's like, I don't know, but he says a very expensive bracelet was taken from his room. Which one of you took the bracelet? Now, guys, to me, it was very clear that it was my other friend because obviously I did not take it. And obviously her denying and me saying it was her, it seems like, you know, I'm just pointing fingers. It's basically hearsay. So now Bloom is like, guys, think about it. Please just bring back whatever you stole. I will take it back and not say who it was between the two of y'all. She's like, this guy's dad is a witch doctor and this guy has spirits that are working with him. And she was like, guys, think about it. Out of all the people that were at that like particular party, why would he point fingers at like specifically us if he did not know? So he was like, if you know yourself, just bring it back. He's not gonna do anything. He just wants it back. And I was just like, you know what, because I know it's not me, like he can do whatever he wants. And the girl said the same thing. So we did not have a chance to talk to her about it because she was mad that one of us would like do something like that, and we're also mad at her because why would she do us dirty like that? I go back home, guys, and when I tell you, within the next 10 business days, baby girl started going insane. Y'all, we would be sitting with her, and I thought she was on like crystal meth. We would be sitting with her and she would be like, do you guys hear that? Like somebody's calling my name. And sometimes she'd hear a snake hissing and I'd be like, baby girl, like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And at some point it got to a point where there was this grandma that stayed front opposite her house, and that grandmother died a very long time before we were even born, y'all. And that grandma, apparently she used to sell acha, and apparently baby girl would tell she would tell us, not apparently, she would tell us that, you know, grandma's at night, grandma X, Y, and Z gives us acha to eat with bread. Like if you're hungry at 3 a.m., you should just walk out of your house and go to grandma X, Y, and Z, and she will give you acha. And I'm like, what? And I remember asking my mom about this grandma. She was like, yeah, she used to sell acha, but like back in the days when we were still growing up, but like she died. Why are you asking about her? And I was like, oh no, I heard people talking about her. Sometimes like I would be visiting her house and she would be gathering rocks and putting them inside a plastic, and I would ask her like, what are you putting those rocks for? She'd be like, oh, they're going to work for us later, and I'm like, later where, how, you know what I mean? And then eventually I stopped like kind of interacting with her, y'all. And this happened over a period of a couple of months. Obviously one time she got so bad, her family took her to the hospital, and the doctors told the family that she seems to be showing signs of schizophrenia, and the family obviously took it to a further level. And because she wasn't born with schizophrenia, they took it to a next level and went to a traditional healer, and the traditional healer told them whatever he had told them, and also told them that the people who know the truth as to what happened are these two people, me and Bloom. Bloom now is acting all oblivious, like she doesn't know. And obviously it kind of switched in my head when the traditional healer was like, we know the truth, because he said some other things, and I was like, oh, it's that party, and baby girl was the one that stole that bracelet. Bloom, guys, refused to say anything to baby girl's parents. They came to my house, and the mom knows my mom, and guys, I told the truth because I did not want it to be like we're not saying anything and it looks like we were both in it. Mind you, she was in it alone, and it's not necessarily Bloom's fault that this happened, but at the same time it's like, why did you put us in such a predicament? You know what I mean? I told them everything from the time we left to the time we got there to the time that Bloom's boyfriend accused us of stealing the bracelet, and I said she took the bracelet. And apparently Bloom's boyfriend's dad is a traditional healer. And eventually, I don't know what happened to Bloom, y'all, but I know that Bloom was taken to her grandma's place in the not Bloom, sorry, the baby girl that went insane. She was taken to the villages to her grandma, and she's still insane. She's still mentally ill, y'all. She's still not okay. Because I had asked her sister the other day, like, where is so and so? She was like, you know, ever since Vele she started whatever she started here, she has never been the same. Until this day, baby girl's family does not speak to Bloom and her family because they blame Bloom for what happened to their child. And guys, I want you guys' thoughts on this. I don't blame Bloom, but I feel like she is partly to blame. But at the same time, it's like, why did she steal? Like, why are you going to people's places and stealing things?
A snake hissing right in your ear as nobody's there is enough to make anyone lose it. It's crazy that she stayed friends with her for so long after she started talking about her dead grandma. She died way before they were even born, but she's still out there handing out food at 3 in the morning. That's a huge red flag. I'm sure she was being haunted by something she couldn't see. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near that situation. If you steal from a witch doctor's family, it's just asking for a curse. I mean, I hope she finds some peace in that village though.
Held people in his home and tortured them for weeks, and no one had any idea. Every single state in the US has had at least one serial killer, if not multiple, and today I'm going to tell you guys about the most notorious serial killer from Missouri. This is a map of all the states I've covered so far in this series. So today again we're talking about Missouri, and we are going to be talking about Robert Berdella. He was born January 21st of 1949 in Ohio, but he later moves to Missouri. He grew up not really fitting in with his peers. He kind of was an awkward kid. He had a speech impediment, glasses, and like people picked on him for that, unfortunately. And his father at times was abusive and very, very strict. And his brother, who was more athletic than him, kind of was like the star child, and Robert was not. He always felt like he was never enough. When he reached puberty, he also realized that he was gay. And if realizing you're gay in the 1950s was not already hard enough, being an outcast socially and then having parents that were abusive and unaccepting makes it even harder. So obviously he was closeted for a very long time. As he became an older teenager, he started to become like very aggressive. He was rude and belittled women constantly. He saw women as lesser than, and his father also died of a heart attack, and he had a really hard time with this. So he kind of became more sad and depressed, and then also aggressive and angry at the same time. In 1965, he saw the film based on the novel The Collector, which, if you don't know anything about it, basically there's a man who stalks and abducts women, holds them captive, and then he also like collects antiques. And if you watch Criminal Minds, they actually have an episode based on this novel. And Robert said that that movie always really stuck with him, and it kind of ended up inspiring him in multiple different ways in life, including liking to collect antiques and then also some other horrible stuff. After seeing The Collector, he ends up starting to write to some pen pals from different countries, and he starts like sharing stamps and collecting like other little antiques. And this becomes like a big hobby of his throughout his life. Also around the same time, after his dad had died, his mom remarried, and Robert was not happy about this. He saw this as like a complete betrayal to his family and his father. And he already had a lot of resentment and anger towards women, and this just made it so much worse. And he just started to really resent his mother and pretty much any woman in his life. In 1967, he graduates high school, and even though he struggled as like a teenager to fit in and everything, he actually did really well in school, and he ended up going to college with the goal of becoming a professor someday, and he did well in college as well. His second year into college, though, he started selling drugs, and he started torturing and experimenting on animals. When he was 19, he ended up getting arrested for selling drugs. He only spent 5 days in jail, though, before the charges ended up being dropped because they just didn't have sufficient evidence, but obviously the university is pissed at this, and he ends up voluntarily leaving the school. So he ends up moving and he gets his own place, and this was 4315 Charlotte Street. By the way, at this point now, like that he's graduated in college, he's openly gay. This is not a secret anymore. And he ends up moving into this place, and he says that he had a place in his heart for like runaways and homeless people and S-workers and stuff like that, and he really wanted to help turn their lives around. So he let many people, especially people living on the street or struggling with drug addiction, to live with him. Some of them would pay rent, some of them would do house chores, and some of them he didn't charge at all. But we learn that part of the reason he wasn't charging some people is because he was exploiting them for S work. He would have with them, and then he would establish this like position of power and dominance, and he would even like loan money to people and help them out, and he tried to seem like this great guy, but he was exploiting people. They needed help, and he knew that, and he said, I'll help you, I'll be that thing that you need, but you have to give me something in return. People in the neighborhood, though, didn't know that he was doing this, and they thought he was like a foster parent to the community. Everyone loved him, they thought he was doing great work, they thought he was just like noble in his cause. As he's doing all of this, he's saying he's being a good person, helping out people in the community. He also is becoming an antiques collector, and he starts an antique business that actually ends up being pretty successful. So now he's got like quite a bit of money. And in 1982, he actually starts bringing his stuff to a flea market in the area. So he sets up a booth, and it's called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar. And he meets all of the surrounding vendors, and one of them is a guy named Paul Howell. He had a booth right next to Robert, and he had a son who would come and help him at the flea market, and his name was Jerry. And Robert ends up becoming friends with the whole family. They become buddies, they bond at the flea market, like they see each other every week at this market, and so they become friends pretty quickly. And at one point, the son, Jerry, even gets in trouble with the police for a minor charge, and Robert helps them get out of that and like helps them deal with it. And so they seem like they're becoming close friends. 2 years after he joins the flea market, though, on July 5th of 1984, Jerry says that he needs a ride to a dancing contest, and Jerry is now 19, by the way. And Robert, being the family friend, offers to drive him. The family has no problem with this. They've known him for 2 years at this point. They trust him. He seems like a great guy, like no red flags to them. And so he offers to drive him. However, when he gets in his car, he starts giving him alcohol and some different medications, and he gives him like huge amounts of these. And once he's intoxicated, he brings him back to the house. He continues drugging him until he's completely unconscious. Then, if that wasn't enough, he gives him a tranquilizer and ties him to the bed. He ends up holding Jerry captive, tied to his bed, for 28 hours. 28 hours he tortured and drugged and essayed and assaulted this teenager. 28 hours. At one point, though, during the like active torture and torment, he starts to gag, and he ends up asphyxiating and dying from the trauma and all of the drugs in his system. And it sounds like at the time Robert didn't mean for him to die, at least not at that point. And so he actually had tried to perform CPR on him, but gave up and dragged his body down to the basement. He ends up suspending his body over a large cooking pot, and trigger warning, all of this is brutal, but this is even more brutal. He ends up draining the blood from his body, and then he dismembers him and wraps him in newspaper and trash bags, and then he puts them in more trash bags and throws them on the curb so that when the garbage collectors come, they will pick up these garbage bags and his dismembered body will go to the landfill. So now the police are obviously looking for Jerry. This 19-year-old just vanished. He's gone missing. And obviously when they retrace footsteps and interview family, they find out that Robert was the one who was supposed to give him a ride. So they're thinking Robert might know where he is, or maybe he was the last one to see him before whoever killed him, because again, they don't know it's Robert at this point. So they end up interviewing Robert, and Robert says that he did drive him to the event and that they went their separate ways. We now know, obviously, that that's not true. He never drove him to the event. He just drove him to his house. And we know that he kept a very detailed graphic log of all the things that he did to Jerry. On April 10th of 1985, a 20-year-old named Robert Shelton, who had actually used to stay with Robert. So this 20-year-old Robert guy asks if he can stay with him for a bit and even offers to pay rent. So Robert, the killer, said he was not physically attracted to him, but 2 days after he arrived, he found him intoxicated and he was mad at him for being irresponsible. So he ended up drugging him. He ended up holding him captive and keeping him compliant with a sedative for 3 days. He absolutely tortured this man and experimented on him while he was both awake and unconscious. At one point, and again, keep in mind that this is really brutal things we're talking about, he put swabs of drain cleaner in his eye and would put needles under his fingernails, and he even filled this guy's ears with hardening caulk to try to make it so he couldn't hear. However, 3 days into the torture, he hadn't wanted to kill him yet, but a man came to Robert's house to fix his roof. This was something he had scheduled days before this other Robert guy had even come to stay with him. And so he knows he needs to kill Robert in order for this guy to come in and not find him or find anything suspicious. So before the guy comes to fix the roof, he ends up suffocating Robert, and then once the worker left from fixing the roof, he dismembered him in the bathroom of the 3rd floor of his house. 2 months after he killed this man, Robert was outside in his yard and he discovers a guy hiding out in his tool shed, and this is during a thunderstorm and like it's starting to rain. This guy was an acquaintance of Robert's. He kind of knew him. I was just trying to seek out shelter in Robert's shed during the storm. And so Robert acts all nice. He says, come on in, like you can stay inside my house, stay warm there. And he notices that the guy seems really like uptight and stressed. So he offers this guy some medications to help him relax. And the guy happily accepts them because he's like, yeah, I'm really stressed. Thank you so much. And this guy's name was Mark Wallace. And 30 minutes after Mark takes the drugs, Robert says that he decides that he's going to hold him captive as well. Robert takes him captive, he ties him up, and then for an entire day, he torments him with intense electrical shocks to the point that he couldn't even stay awake or conscious anymore. Robert starts experimenting on him with substances and needles, and according to Robert's very detailed log that he's been keeping on all of these things that he's doing, Mark's time of death was June 23rd at 7 p.m. With each murder so far, he somehow increased the brutality and morbid level of torment, and it just keeps getting worse. I will not be getting into every single detail because I don't think TikTok would allow me to, and also like it's just horrific. Like, these people are enduring things for days and days and days, and he's just doing whatever he wants to them, and there's not really always a pattern or a reason. Like, he's just kind of doing whatever he wants or whatever he thinks of in the moment. But the pattern that does stick is that with each person, he is getting worse. He's getting more violent, more scary, more sadistic. What he started out doing is all sorts of levels of horrific. So the fact that he gets worse is so scary. On September 26th of 1985, he's been killing for over a year at this point. He gets a phone call from an acquaintance. His name is James Ferris, and he asks if he can stay with Robert for a few days. He knows Robert has housed people in the past and that he seems generous in the community, so he asks if he can stay. And Robert says, of course you can, and plans to capture him as well. He says that this was the first guy that he actually planned to torture. Up until this point, he had just kind of gone into it without a plan. He had viewed it more as experimenting than torture, and like he wasn't even sure what he was going to do to these men. That's terrifying. All of the horrific things I've already told you about, he just kind of came up with. This next victim, he's going in with a plan. That means it is so much worse than the first few victims. So James comes to stay with him, and that night, Robert makes them a meal, and he ends up putting tranquilizers in his meal and drugs him. After he is incapacitated, he ties him to his bed, and he tortures him for 27 hours straight. 27 hours straight of just torment. And we now know that that's like the shortest amount of time that his victim was tormented. 27 hours is the shortest amount of time that he tormented someone. So during his 27 hours of torment, he was shocked with an electrical shock in his shoulder, and then he also kept putting needles and different substances in him, and he continued to essay and harm him until he could literally no longer function on his own. And in Robert's detailed log, he finally said he 86'd him. Robert had worked in a kitchen for many years, and if you have worked in the restaurant or service industry, you know that 86ing something means to remove it from the menu or take something out, like we're no longer serving it. So him saying he 86'd him is his way of saying that he killed him. On June 17th of 1986, about 9 months after he killed James, he ran into a guy who had stayed with him a few times previously. His name was Todd Stoops, and he was 23 years old. He was a drug addict and an S worker, and in the past, in 1984, so 2 years before, him and his wife had both stayed with Robert multiple times as they were trying to get back on their feet. And they randomly ran into each other at a park, and Robert just kind of takes this as an opportunity. He says like, hey, come over for lunch, we can catch up. And then he also offers to give him money for S work as well. And the guy needed money for drugs, and so he agrees. And Robert says he was super physically attracted to Todd, which is why he ends up holding Todd captive for so long. Todd was his prisoner for 2 entire weeks. 14 days he endured some of the worst torment and torture and pain that I think a human could ever experience. First, at the beginning, he started drugging him and making him like an S slave, but as the days continue, he wanted to increase his fear and terror because he enjoyed other people's fear. And so he starts to increase the torture, the electrical shocks, he increases the voltage, he starts injecting him with everything. At one point, he literally tried to shock his eyeballs directly. Like he put the metal devices on his eyes and administered an electric shock. And this was because he was hoping to blind him. Also, injected drain cleaner into his throat, trying to silence him. There are no words to describe how absolutely monstrous evil this man was. More than 7 days in to Todd being held captive, he is starving, dehydrated, bleeding, beaten. A part of his body had been literally ruptured from the trauma, and he's not only physically broken, but he was emotionally broken as well. By the last day that he was alive, he was so weak he couldn't even breathe when he was sitting up, and on July 1st he ended up dying. And later, after he was discovered, there was an autopsy done, and they learned that the reason that he died was because he had become septic a week before due to the rupturing injury that he had. In the spring of 1987, Robert ends up meeting a 20-year-old named Larry Wayne Pearson, and they become friends, they hit it off. Larry ends up staying with him for a while and did housework for Robert. He didn't immediately hold him captive, but he had been planning to do stuff to him this whole time. And so a couple months into his stay, in June, he decides it's time to capture him. On June 23rd, they are hanging out at the house, and Larry had made a comment earlier in the day about hurting gay people, and this is when Robert decided, like, this is time. And he waits until Larry gets intoxicated, and then he injects him with some things, brings him to the basement where he ties him up, and then he puts drain cleaner in his throat. He starts to shock him over and over and over again, and he endured the torture for 5 days. And he tried to comply as much as possible and actually kind of started to get Robert to trust him, that like he wouldn't escape, he wouldn't fight. And so Robert ended up moving him to the 2nd floor of the building. And he said that if he behaved, he wouldn't hurt him as much. And so if Larry behaved the way that Robert wanted him to, Robert would let him stay on the 2nd floor. The torment wasn't as much, and he still was being like hurt by Robert, but it just wasn't to the extreme level of being in the basement. But if he didn't listen to Robert, or if Robert got angry, he would bring him back down to the basement, and the like horrible torture would begin all over again. The amount of time that he held Larry as his prisoner and kept him like captive is absolutely insane. Like I can't even fathom going through torment for 1 minute, let alone for as long as he held him. He held him for 6 weeks. That is more than 42 days that he just had to endure this like scary, violent man doing whatever he wanted to him. One day, after he'd been held for 6 weeks, Robert ends up getting his man parts too close to Larry's mouth, and Larry bites him hard. Unfortunately, though, this only injures Robert. It doesn't give Larry enough of an opening to escape, and Robert ends up angrily killing Larry in that moment. After he kills Larry, he goes to the hospital to get treated for his wounds, and I have to wonder if anyone at the hospital was like, who is this guy and is he doing something bad? Because it's not common to get bit in that area. If you're getting like injured or bit there, kind of seems like someone's doing that out of revenge, and he probably was doing something inappropriate. So I wonder if anyone at the hospital thought that was weird or tried to report it or anything, because I would definitely be suspicious if someone had that kind of injury. I would think that they had done something and someone retaliated, which is what happened. When he returned from the hospital after getting treated, he ended up dismembering Larry's body, and he kept his head in the freezer for a while before burying him in the backyard. On March 29th of 1988, at 1 a.m., Robert ends up abducting a 22-year-old male S worker. His name was Christopher Bryson, and he had lured him to his house for S work. As he enters his house, he ends up knocking him unconscious with an iron bar and then ties him to the bed. And he starts abusing and tormenting him for multiple days. And he had a very similar plan to do what he had done to Larry to Christopher, and just to inflict as much pain and suffering onto Christopher as he possibly could. And Christopher did everything he could to comply and listen to him and try to build up any sort of trust with Robert so that Robert would not think he was going to run away and put his guard down so that Christopher could escape. So on the 3rd day of being a prisoner, Robert had tied his hands in front of him instead of behind his head to the bed, because Christopher said it hurt for his arms to be tied behind him, and he promised he was not going to run away. And the next day, he ends up breaking free of his restraints because Robert had left a thing of matches that that he'd been using previously to torture Christopher. He left them within his reach, and when Robert left the room for a while, Christopher was able to burn the restraints and escape, and he jumped out the second floor window, and he actually broke his foot while jumping, but he was so terrified and driven by adrenaline that I don't even think he cared. He just ran to get help. And by the way, he was on the run wearing nothing but a dog collar. That is all he was wearing. He is so absolutely terrified, and he knows if he doesn't escape, he will be killed. So they end up calling the police, and at first, police are a little bit skeptical about some of the stuff Christopher says, because police never take S workers seriously, especially if it's a man saying he's been SA'd. People do not take men seriously when they say they've been assaulted. So at first they don't know if they believe him, but they end up like seeing all of his injuries, and they're like, okay, something had to have happened to this guy. Also told the police that the guy who captured him had showed him Polaroids of other men that were deceased, and they're like, okay, we at least need to like look into this. And so that day they get a search warrant for his house, and they find multiple different things that Christopher had told them they were going to find, including multiple different ways of torturing people. They found restraints with the beds, wires, an electrical transformer near the beds. They found syringes, drugs, different like things he'd been injecting in them, iron pipes, rope, belts, collars, and more. And then they also found a human skull in one of the closets and one in the backyard. They also ended up finding human vertebrae and then teeth in an envelope. The other horrific graphic thing that they find is 334 separate Polaroids and then 34 more prints of photos of men being tortured or they were deceased in his house. Over 300 photos. He was taking photos of everything he was doing. He also kept that detailed log. So the police found out exactly what he was doing to these people, and it was horrific. It did take them a while to identify some of the men in the photos, and they are all the victims that I previously mentioned, but they didn't necessarily know their identities right away. But now, obviously, we know who they were. So Robert ends up getting charged with multiple things, including some of the charges that I can't say because I think TikTok will take it down. And he was held in jail with a $500,000 bail, and that is equivalent to $2 million today. That is a very high number to set for bail. First, he pled not guilty. He said he was innocent, blah, 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 blah. They always do. But the death penalty was on the table. And so eventually he's like, I don't want to die. Can we make a deal? And so he takes a plea deal. And in the end, he is convicted in 1988. But in 1992, only 4 years into his prison sentence, he started complaining to prison staff that he was having chest pain. Later that day, he ended up dying at only 43 years old from a heart attack. That's what happens when you do horrible things to people. Your body fails you. Obviously, Robert was a horrible sadist. He hurt so many people, and I'm very glad that he's no longer around to hurt anyone else. But I can't even imagine the fear and the hopelessness that all of his victims felt in the days that they were enduring all of his torture. To him, it was just a game. To him, it was an experiment. It was like he was playing with toys. But these were real people with real feelings and real lives and real loved ones. He preyed on the fact that they needed help and used that to his advantage to keep an upper hand and then capture and harm them.
Someone was held for 6 weeks in that building, and that's really something to think about. Larry was there for 42 days. It's hard to see how a person survives in that kind of pain for so long. Robert said he 86'd his victims, and it's a lot to process. He treated human lives like simple items on a restaurant menu. It shows he didn't care about people at all. Christopher's escape gives me a little hope in this mess. He jumps out of a window with a broken foot just to get away. And that shows how much he wanted to live. I'm glad he finally got caught.
I'll call Corey wrote in. He said he hooked up with an actress in 2006 and she had a number of strange things in the mini fridge in her hotel room. It's always fun when I get to start a spooky scary story off with a disclaimer. This is one of those stories. If this resembles any certain type of person, can't prove the validity of this story. These stories could come from anyone. Don't come for me. I'm not making any allegations. I'm not going to use the person's name. Okay, now that we've got that all out of the way, he says this is 100% true. He's told this to a few people and everybody that he's told thinks he's crazy. But now with the release of a certain set of files, it doesn't seem so far-fetched. So he was in Shreveport, Louisiana in 2006. He was gambling. He was at a casino on the third floor of a casino boat playing poker on a Saturday night, as he often did. And there was a party happening in an adjoining room. He could hear the DJ from the party playing music, but knew it was a privately rented room, so he couldn't do anything about it. He just went about his poker game. There had been a murder mystery being filmed in Shreveport, Louisiana, where this story takes place. The film had just wrapped, and he found out that the party in the adjoining room was the wrap party for this film. There was security everywhere. It was very VIP. It was absolutely not open to the public. Cool. He's not concerned. He's happy to play his poker game. But around 11 p.m., it is announced that this very famous, very beautiful actress is entering the room. And everybody cheered. And he said the reason she was entering was because she had to use the restroom. And the restroom was shared between the two rooms and the adjoining deck. She had to walk through this poker room or something to get to the bathroom. And he said he had just taken a bathroom break and he was coming out of the restroom as she was entering the women's restroom. As they passed in the hallway, they locked eyes. He said hi and she smiled at him. And he said, he's not even gonna lie, he was fanboying hard because she was gorgeous, but her bodyguard was right outside the bathroom and he was keeping a watchful eye, so he just kept it moving. He was still slowly walking back to the table because he was hoping that she would come out of the bathroom so that he had another chance to talk to her, because he said that he felt, as they locked eyes, that there was chemistry. As he was almost back at his poker table, he says he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turns around, she's standing there. She's like, hey, and they start talking. And it was just kind of the three of them. It was her, him, and then the bodyguard standing a few feet away. After a minute of her asking him about him asking her about her, she invites him back to the party in the private room. And of course he says yes. So he goes and he said it was filled with other people that were in the movie, stagehands, directors, everybody involved. And they had a great time at the party. He said, for reference, he also doesn't drink or use any type of substances. This is important, but he says that they spent hours talking and hanging out and laughing at the party. And after a few hours, the party was winding down, but they were still talking. And the bodyguard, by the way, never left their little bubble. He was always just a few feet away. Said he was absolutely in awe that she was paying him attention, even though he did feel like there was chemistry. But he was just like, I always thought she was gorgeous. I never thought that she would give somebody like me a chance. And this is the part that he says everybody questions his story. Nobody believes him anyway, but he says that she invited him back to her hotel room. Of course, he says yes again. They are followed by the bodyguard. They leave the party. They get back to the room. She's sort of hanging on him because she had been drinking and he said she was slightly intoxicated. But they get back to her hotel room and there was an adjoining room for the security guard. And it had like the door in the middle. So the security guard went in his room, but they left the door open. She told him that she needed to shower and would he mind waiting? He says yes. He sat on the bed. She comes out of the shower in a towel. She motions for the bodyguard to close the adjoining door. He does. They talk for a little while. They do a thing. They ended up laying around, laughing and talking for the majority of the night until about 5 a.m. when she tells him, hey, I think it's time for me to wind down. I'm actually getting pretty tired. I want to go to sleep. He's like, okay, no problem. He's trying to gauge if she wants him to stay or if she wants him to leave. And she goes to the little mini fridge cooler. And this is what boggles his mind because she opens it up. He says inside were packs of blood and packs of what appeared to be beef jerky. He said the packs were the exact same as they take when you donate blood. And he said he must have looked shocked and she saw the look on his face and she just brushed it off and she was like, oh my gosh, it's no big deal. Everybody does this. It's necessary. We do a lot of things that normal people would think are disgusting, but anyone who has sealed the deal has to do this. He's like, seal what deal? And she's like, I've already said too much, but just know that it gets tiring. He says she also mentioned at some point that she was a lot older than people assumed that she was. I'm not sure the context of that conversation in which that happened. So he said after she told him this, he was floored and he didn't know what to say or do. And she actually offered him some of what she was having. Said he politely turned it down and she was just like, no worries, it's okay. So she did tell him something to the effect of, well, you're missing out. And he says that they cuddled. He wanted to leave, but he was like too afraid to. And he didn't want to appear weird to her after he had just revealed all of this to him. I don't know. They cuddled. She ends up falling asleep. He said he did like talking to her. She talked to him like she had known him her entire life. She felt very comfortable, like they had been lovers. And he said that eventually she just said goodnight and fell asleep in his lap. He waited until he was sure that she was completely asleep. He covered her up and then he went to leave. But as he tried the door, he realized it was locked somehow from the outside. And he started banging on the door and the bodyguard in the adjoining room came in and he said, is she asleep? And he said, yes. The bodyguard says, are you leaving now or when she wakes up? And he says, I'm going to leave now. And the bodyguard says, good call. But before you leave, I need your identification. Corey's like, what? And he says, yeah, I need you to sign an NDA. You will sign before you leave. He said it was not being offered as an option. Said the bodyguard, while seemingly nice, was also very firm, and so he just said, sure, no problem. And he followed him into the adjoining room where there was an NDA on the table, which he signed. He also took a picture of his ID, and he says after that happened, a third person entered the room, and it was a lawyer type woman. She was reading him a bunch of legal jargon, gave him another form to sign, which he said he was in such a hurry to leave, he just signed it. And then they said, we're going to have some people take you to your truck in the parking garage. And this also freaked out Corey because he had not mentioned anything about his truck or where it was parked. But 3 other men came in the room and they seemed like bodyguard types. They walked him to his truck in the parking garage. And when they get to his truck, one of the men opens up the door and says, have a nice day. And he does this. And he puts his finger over his lips as if to indicate to hush. Inside the truck, there was a copy of the NDA that he had signed pinned to his visor. He said, I have no idea how they got inside. I had the keys the entire time. But as I pulled out of the parking garage, another black truck followed me out and followed me for about a mile down the interstate. He was super freaked out upon getting home. He said he could not sleep. He took a shower, he ate some food, and finally ended up going to bed around 4 or 5 p.m. the next day. And he slept forever. He said when he woke up, he was completely exhausted. After this experience, he said he had nightmares for weeks. And he says, I don't care if anyone believes me. This is 100% true. While the nightmares finally stopped, I will never, ever forget this. He says he still has a copy of the NDA in a safe vault.
I'd be so startled if I opened the fridge and saw actual bags of blood sitting there with some beef jerky. Most people only have leftovers or a few sodas. Sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. Then she tells him she's way older than she looks. That's pretty weird. The way they forced him to sign those forms before he could even exit the room feels a bit intense. He found an NDA right on his dashboard, even though he didn't leave the door unlocked. It's like they were watching every single move they made this entire night. And that's it for today. If you liked the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe comment down below which story was your favorite. You can click on this next video, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.